What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, December 13th, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got lots and lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. So let's get right on into it. Right now, the House hearing on the Clinton Foundation is taking place. And as you know, the gentleman who was supposed to be there, Huber, canceled with no explanation. And so it's focusing on Tom Fitton and various other compliance lawyers. And watching what's going on here, the Democrats are desperate to shift the focus to Trump and Whitaker foundations. And they're out there saying, well, you know, I mean, the Clintons are out of office. This is old news, really. Why are we even bothering? It's not like it's a current event, but, you know, Trump is president, and we should be looking into the Trump Foundation here. And another one of the arguments the Democrats keep putting forward is, well, if the IRS and the FBI didn't do anything, then doesn't that sort of prove the Clintons did nothing wrong? And one of the Democrats actually came out and said, you know, when I get donations for my campaigns, the people who are writing me those checks, they do expect something back. There is a quid pro quo. So what's the big deal about the Clinton Foundation doing exactly the same thing? Well, we're not talking about donations to a political campaign, and Secretary of State is not an elected office, and it is illegal. Now, they're trying to get the Uranium One deal in there, but the Democrats, every time they get the floor, they're just out there. We need to go over here. We need to do this. They're just trying to stall and run out the clock here. And unfortunately, because of the start of this broadcast, I had to turn it off. But I'm sure somebody will be posting the highlights later on YouTube or something like that. So anyway, the U.S. Attorney for Utah, John Huber, didn't testify. And Meadows had wanted to quiz Huber on whether any of the Clinton Foundation's tax-exempt money was used for personal gain. Now, Huber was assigned to investigate this, and this was when he was supposed to present his final report. And now he isn't. And the House Oversight Committee, as well as all the other House panels, transfer to Democratic control end of next month, because of the midterm elections, which means this is all going to go away. They're just going to run out the clock. And Huber's spokeswoman confirmed that Huber wouldn't testify. No reason given. Just, nope, not going to do it. Apparently, there was another witness that was a no-show, supposedly because of a death in the family. No explanation given there. So, again, looking at how hard they're trying to protect the Clinton Foundation and its links to the email server and Uranium One, yeah, there is something really, really ugly behind it all, and I think I know what it is here. Anyway, Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch was testifying and presented information on the pay-to-play and the Uranium One scandals. And apparently, he stated right there, he has been hampered by the fact that the Department of Justice routinely refuses to turn over requested documents, and that Judicial Watch has to keep going back to court and having a judge order the documents to be turned over. Again, another indicator something really nasty has been covered up there. Now, the feds have been secretly holding on to 6,000 pages of whistleblower documents coming out of the Clinton Foundation that claimed the foundation engaged in misappropriation of funds. Donors were assured they could count on favors from Hillary Clinton, while she was Secretary of State. And apparently there was this whistleblower submission filed secretly more than a year ago with the IRS and the FBI, which is where we get back to that Democratic argument. Well, if they're not doing anything, obviously the Clintons, you know, are innocent. The Clintons have got Washington, D.C. by the short and curlies. Even Israel doesn't have that kind of control over them. Okay, let's turn back over to the Yellow Vest protests. Accusations are coming on out that the police this last weekend were deliberately shooting the protesters. They weren't firing over the heads. It wasn't just the tear gas. They were actually shooting. Apparently, one of the protesters lost an eye, and she says she's convinced the police deliberately targeted her. Okay. Now, Macron did survive his no confidence vote earlier today, and I'm sure he's feeling very smug about that. And so I don't know that he's out of the woods yet. The protests are going to continue here. There was a Yellow Vest protest up in Canada, and people are starting to wonder, could this go global next spring? And I think, yeah, it might just do that. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, the Yellow Vests have put out an official list of 25 demands, at which point they'll end the crisis, okay? And the resignation of Macron did not make this cut. They dropped that one. But they want the general state of the tax system and to be repaired, amend the Constitution to prevent the state from taking more than 25% of the income of citizens. Increase of 40% in the basic pension and social welfare programs. Massive hiring increase in the public sector to reestablish the public services. Trains, hospitals, schools, postal services, a lot of that stuff got cut back. They want the construction of 5 million rent-controlled housing units throughout France to lower the rents. They want the banking monopolies ended. Good luck on that one. They want the too-big-to-fail banks broken up. And they want to separate regular banking from investment banking, which is a good idea. That's what Glass-Steagall was all about here in the United States of America. A hard lesson learned in the crash of 1929. And then some years ago, the bankers went to Congress and said, "Look, we won't make the same mistakes again. Just repealed Glass-Steagall," and it was done. And the problem when you have investment banks and commercial banks working together is that very often the customer's money from the commercial side of the banks winds up being invested in highly speculative and risky investments on the investment side. And that's what a big part of what happened back in 2008. They want a complete prohibition on taxpayer-funded bank bailouts. And they want all debts accrued through usurious rates of interest to be wiped out. And there's more on here. They want the Constitution rewritten for the people and national sovereignty. They want referendums to vote on popular initiatives. They want limits on lobbying. It's a very good list. We could actually use a lot of this stuff here. Now, some of it's getting a little silly. They want to prohibit the marketing of plastic bottles and other pollutions. And they definitely want to weaken the influence of big pharma on health in general and hospitals in particular. They want a ban on all GMO. They want a ban on carcinogenic pesticides, and we know who they're talking about with that one. And, of course, they want the borders closed. So, it's a big, long list, and I wished them luck. Now, a little bit of news. This was just breaking as we went to airtime. Sheriff Shakat, who was the Strasbourg Christmas market shooter, has been killed. And apparently he was killed in the Neudorf neighborhood of the city following a counter-terror operation launched on Thursday evening, according to the French police. Now, I'm glad they got this guy. What he did was terrible, but it's going to make things a little more difficult for Macron, because he was planning on using that threat of more Christmas shootings to try and discourage the Yellow Vests from taking to the streets this weekend again. Well, that's now gone. And it's not just France. Apparently over in Hungary, there are major riots going on regarding the new legislation coming from the EU, the labor law. It's a very controversial labor law. They're demanding Orban to scrap this law. They're calling it a slave law. And so far they've blocked a major bridge, waving flags and placards. The new law basically triggered furious letters to EU figureheads Jean-Claude Juncker, Donald Tusk, Antonio Tajani, all in the same EPP coalition in the European Parliament with Mr. Orban. I'm sorry, Orban. It's a typo in the original article. So they're up in arms as well. Everybody's getting ready to riot. This could go global. I have been saying it all along. This push to create a global government creates a political environment conducive to a global revolution. So, moving on here to the war zones, of which there are many. Turkey is now threatening the U.S.-backed Kurdish forces with a new operation in northern Syria. And apparently during the Turkish Defense Industry Summit on the 12th, President Erdogan said the Turkish armed forces will launch an operation east of the Euphrates in a few days to save it from a separatist terrorist organization. And he slammed the U.S. plan to establish observation posts along the Syria-Turkey border. And basically said, it is clear the purpose of these observation points in Syria is not to protect our country from terrorists, but to protect the terrorists from Turkey. But apparently Erdogan really believes that he can pull this off regardless of the risk, and claims are being made that 15,000 of the rebels may back Turkey's operation in northeastern Syria. So that's a serious conflict. Meanwhile, over at the Pentagon, they have a different view. Turkish unilateral action in northeast Syria would be unacceptable. And they're saying Ankara should consult with the United States to address the security situation. Well, Turkey has been addressing the situation with the United States and nothing ever gets done. There we are. So the Pentagon is out there. A Defense Department spokesperson, Commander Sean Robertson, is saying that unilateral military action in northeast Syria by any party, particularly as U.S. personnel may be present or in the vicinity, is of grave concern. Now, they're calling for coordination and consultation between the U.S. and Turkey. Turkey might refuse. Are we going to go to war with Turkey? Meanwhile, the Russian military has moved the S-300 air defense system near the front lines of the U.S. coalition forces in eastern Syria. So the Russians are concerned of possible renewed U.S. strikes into Syria. Now, the other day, Mike Pompeo came on out screaming and frothing at the mouth about Iran testing a new ballistic missile that was capable of hitting Europe. And Iran has basically come on out and said, yeah, that's what we did. We test fired this medium-range ballistic missile. We test them to make sure they work properly, which, by the way, the Russians had one of their test missiles blow up just off the launch pad in Kapustin Yar. Now, the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, says the United States is complicit in the crimes the Saudi regime has been committing in a years-long war against the people of Yemen. And addressing the families of Iranian martyrs in a meeting in Tehran, Khamenei pointed out the Saudi regime's failures in the war it's been waging against Yemen with Washington's support. One of the failures is the fact they thought it was going to be over in just a couple of months. The Saudis thought they would gain control of Yemen in a matter of days or weeks, but the further they go, the harder they will fall down, and the more stinging will be the blow that they receive. Now, the U.S. Senate has now voted to end U.S. support for the Saudi war in Yemen. this is seen as punishment for the murder of the Washington Post reporter Khashoggi. And it's unfortunately a largely symbolic vote because the bill is not expected to pass in the House of Representatives. But the Arabic language website of Sputnik is quoting well-informed sources as disclosing that 400 non-Syrian terrorists have arrived in Idlib through Turkey's southern border with Syria in the last 2 months. It said they'd arrived in the region from where Yemen crossed this was badly. Basically what they're saying is hundreds of terrorists are leaving Yemen for the northern Syria battlefields. So things are just heating up over there. Now, a little bit of good news, at least for the moment. Yemen's warring parties have agreed to a ceasefire in the city of Hodeidah. United Nations Secretary General Guterres has announced this in Sweden. And he said the agreement included the deployment of neutral forces and the establishment of humanitarian corridors. I think Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman just blinked. And I think it's a good thing. Okay, story coming out of Press TV, quoting Mustafa Kosheshim, who's a journalist and political commentator, saying that the reason the United States is supporting Saudi Arabia is to make it a gendarme of the region, at which point they can sell more and more guns to the Saudis. So basically the United States wants the Middle East in tension. They want it destabilized. They do not want things calm because that's good for the armament sale here. Over in Israel, Israeli soldiers accompanied by Jewish settlers broke into the northern West Bank village and archaeological site of Sebastia yesterday, which led to a confrontation with the village's Palestinian residents. And basically these soldiers accompanied a busload of settlers in a very provocative visit to the site. And while they were there, soldiers fired tear gas and stun grenades into the village. Now, the settlers are saying this is just tourism, but it's a closed site. It's not supposed to be open to tourism. But apparently this is becoming a regular thing that they're doing. Israel's parliament has rejected a draft bill affirming citizens' rights to equality. Now, report by Israeli activist Yossi Gerbitz from Mondoweiss, the Knesset voted down the bill by 71 to 38. And basically, the bill just said, the state of Israel shall maintain equal political rights amongst all of its citizens without any difference between religions, race, and sex. In other words, apartheid is now legal in Israel. This one's a little bit silly. Back on the 25th of November, Israeli forces detained a 6-year-old Palestinian child and detained him for an hour without family members present. Anyway, yesterday we were talking about this story where it has come on out that Israelis were disguising themselves as aid workers to get inside the Gaza Strip to cover up assassinations or to conduct assassinations. And more details are beginning to surface, but apparently these disguised aid workers tried to drive into Gaza, and the Hamas security men stopped them and asked them questions, and the answers did not add up. A shootout then ensued. We're going to take a break here for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about events down in Israel. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu basically said Israel would not rule out undertaking military action inside Iran. And Netanyahu was asked what his red line would be for attacking Iranian territory. rather than just the Iranian proxies alleged to be operating in Syria. And Netanyahu said, our red line is our survival. I'm not ruling out doing anything that we need to do to defend ourselves. We do what is necessary to protect the state of Israel against the Iranian regime, which openly calls for the annihilation of the Jewish state, which, by the way, that's a lie. Remember when Ahmadinejad was in office and they came on out and said, oh, he said he wants to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, or wipe Israel from the map. That's not what he said. He actually said Israel will fade from the pages of history, which is a very passive statement. Unfortunately, a lot of what you hear about Israel, or the Middle East rather, comes through an organization called MEMRI, the Middle East Media Reporting Institute, which provides free translations of Arab news articles to the Western media. But MEMRI is a propaganda front for Israel, and the translations are always faulty and skewed to present a very negative image of what's going on in these other countries here. Now, interestingly enough, there was a report leaked from Creative Community for Peace, which is a front for the Israel government-backed lobby group Stand With Us, that admits the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is being effective. And it is growing, and they even described it as innovative. So, hitting them right where it hurts in their wallets here. Okay, Angela Merkel came on out the other day and said Germany might be willing to up sanctions on Russia because of the Kirsch incident. But apparently the German Foreign Ministry, the head of the Foreign Ministry, Heiko Maas, is saying that no, Germany has no interest in new anti-Russia sanctions. Of course, Merkel's on her way out anyway. They're already searching for a replacement. Apparently, she will not last till the end of her term. Earlier in the week, we reported on these stories about how Kiev is getting ready to launch a massive attack into Donbass. One report said it's going to happen tomorrow on the 14th. And we're getting a confirmation now from Russia Today, which says Kiev may start a major offensive in the east within days. They're not nailing it down to a particular day. But the Ukrainian military has amassed troops in Kiev-controlled eastern parts of the country, citing reports from international monitors. And there are reports that within several days, Kiev will stage an armed provocation on the contact line. This is from Maria Zakharova. So that's going to be cranking up as well. There was an interesting analysis that came out of Russia Insider saying that the enmity between Ukrainians and Russians is artificial. It's manufactured by the West, by propaganda, and basically they're saying it goes all the way back to when the Soviet Union wanted to incorporate Ukraine. Now, Ukraine used to be an independent nation, and it is once again. And they wanted to bring it into the socialist empire. So, a lot of hostility out there. Another article, this one also from Russia Insider, don't let Ukraine drag America into the war. And it says, Ukraine's behavior in the Kerch Strait is another example of a U.S. ally trying to gain American military backing for its own parochial agenda. Now, if you'll remember, back in 2008, Georgia tried to do that regarding its territorial dispute with Russia over two secessionist regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And a European Union-sponsored report subsequently concluded that Georgia started the fighting that broke out in August of that year. Our media said, oh, Russia bad, Russia bad, Russia bad. And there is little doubt that Georgian President Saakashvili expected to get much stronger support from the U.S. and NATO than he ultimately reserved. Saudi Arabia routinely tries to entangle the United States in Riyadh's regional power struggles with Tehran, although there are a lot of people in Tehran or rather in Washington, who would want to go along for that. And, of course, we have the U.S. military support for the war in Yemen. Okay, now, getting on back to this situation with China and everybody getting detained. Apparently, there's been a second Canadian detained. More about that when we come back from commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about a second Canadian citizen being detained in China. This is businessman Michael Spavor, who worked with North Korea, and apparently he's being investigated on suspicion of harming China's security, which is kind of a broad brush to paint with here. And so the situation is building. Canada's been unable to contact Spavor since he notified the government that he was being questioned by the Chinese authorities. So things are getting very, very tense there. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You know, I find amazing how, well, Ukraine's afraid, like back in the day, the Soviet Union was going to swallow them up, or but like you look now, like all these countries are willing to like let the EU and NATO take over them. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Yes.
You know, like you know what I mean? I mean, it's just crazy. Like, and when they come in, like when you join the EU, you can't leave. It's like the guy Sonny from the Bronx. Now you can't leave. You know, they won't let you leave. They'll put sanction on you. You know, it's like a relative that comes over and he won't leave. You know? I mean,
yeah, well,
I don't know.
In this case, it's a case of the relative comes on over and you lock the door on him, you know, which is obviously what Brussels is trying to do to Great Britain.
Remember that movie Red Dawn, when the Soviet Union, like it was Russia, the Soviet Union, Cuba, and Nicaragua invaded the U.S.? You look at like it's like Blue Dawn, what we got going on, you know, like around the world. We got all these military bases. I mean, basically, isn't this like a stealth? Basically, NATO's a stealth invasion with the EU right behind them, right? I mean, that's what it is.
Well, NATO's invasion isn't very stealthy, but definitely the EU. I mean, EU is, if you look at the map, they're basically recapturing control of all the territories of Europe that the Nazis wanted.
Yep, and you know, Mike, I don't know if people know this, but not only is NATO located in Brussels, right, Belgium, but so is the IMF. So the debt is right behind it, right? I mean, that's it. You know, like they'll put you into debt slavery.
Yes. Like,
you know, with Ukraine, we'll let you borrow all this money. We know you can't repay it, so you're going to have to sell us, your land, or this or that, your companies, or this or that. You know, it's all a big scam. You know, hey, Mike, on related news, you know, I don't know if you heard this, but Russia, there's a battalion of 2S7. That's the motorized howitzers, or they're 203 millimeter.
Wow.
Those are trains headed somewhere, and it's probably headed toward their base, like, 11 miles from the border. I mean, they don't have to put them that close because they shoot pretty far. But yeah, so you got motorized artillery headed over there. So, and it's funny, the Ukraine even, I mean, like Trump saying, we're not going to tell you our plan. Well, the Ukraine's already said they're going to do something. So yes. They already televised it, basically. It's totally stupid. But I keep saying, Mike, because I'm, my family's from Ukraine. They're going to run. They don't have, like I said, they don't have that. They don't know what they are in Ukraine.
They're not motivated. They're not motivated. They don't have the moral law on their side. Go back and read your Sun Tzu.
And it's not going very good in Ukraine. I mean, because, with the gas price increases over there, and it's rough over there. And, they don't like Poroshenko because that's why he got an 8% approval rating.
Yeah.
So that's all I needed wanted to tell you, Mike. Have a good show.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on back to the growing friction with China, a few days ago, Cisco advised its employees to avoid non-essential travel to China. China protested. Cisco said the message was sent out erroneously. But now China has returned the favor, and Chinese researchers working in sensitive high-tech sectors have been warned not to take any unnecessary trips to the United States as unease grows in the business community following the arrest of a tech executive in Canada. So we may be seeing the beginning of this, let's go snatch each other's scientists. Okay, anyway, workers at a research agency who can't avoid crossing the Pacific were also told that if they did have to travel to the U.S., they should remove any sensitive information from their mobile phones and laptops. Definitely should do that. Apparently, TSA is really starting to get into more and more cell phones and tablets. It used to be an occasional thing. Now it's just becoming very regular. They're just scanning everybody's cell phones and laptops and snarfing up the information. Over in Korea, a little bit of history was made yesterday when soldiers from North and South Korea peacefully crossed the demilitarized zone for the first time ever. You know, obviously symbolic gesture, but once again, it suggests that Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in are really seriously thinking about reunification of Korea. That would put a real dent in U.S. plans for that area. Down in Venezuela, President Maduro has accused the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton of preparing a plot to assassinate him, and has also called out Colombian leader Ivan Duque as Bolton's accomplice. So it may sound paranoid, but if you look back at the history of how the United States has interfered in Venezuela, it's not that outlandish. Don't forget Hugo Chavez. There was actually a U.S. organized coup d'etat that drove him for power for exactly 1 week. Anyway, getting on back to Germany, Angela Merkel has announced her resignation as head of the Christian Democratic Union Party, and she has said she will not run for another term as chancellor. And in December, the CDU elected a new head, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, who is considered to be Merkel's protege and eventual replacement. Now, there's talk here that Merkel may resign from her post in favor of Annegret and leave in midterm, which I'm sure would be cause for much celebration. All right, let's get on to Julian Assange here, because there was always something wanky about that statement that Ecuador had written assurances from Great Britain that they would not extradite Julian Assange to any place where he might face the death penalty. And even Julian Assange came out and said, I'm not buying this one. Well, down in Ecuador, they're sort of shuffling their feet and saying that Quito cannot guarantee that London would not extradite Assange to a third country. This is coming from Ecuadorian President General Inigo Salvador. And they go back to say Ecuador has received the written guarantees, but that's really all that we can do. So, what's he been in there now? 6 going on 7 years? It really is insane. And it really is part of this attack on the right of the people to know what the government is doing with their money here. All right, over at Sean Hannity, he's out there on TV and he's saying indictments are coming for the Clintons, and he basically said the hammer's about to fall. He told his guests Sarah Carter, John Solomon, and Greg Jarrett that he had it on good authority that indictments were about to be issued. I wish it were true. But if I am correct on what lies behind the Hillary Clinton email server, which was espionage. And if enough politicians were dipping into that Clinton Foundation, I'm sorry, Sean, I don't think anything's going to happen. I don't think anything's going to come out of these hearings today. The Clintons are absolutely untouchable. Back in 2016, during the campaign, when all of this stuff was being brought on up, it was reported that Hillary Clinton literally said that if she was brought down, she'd bring down the entire government with her, and this is a lady who can do it. Now, Miles Honig, he's a former Green Party candidate for Congress, and he was being interviewed on Press TV, basically saying that Donald Trump cannot handle the reality that's overcoming his presidency, and he's losing his hold on the presidency. And he was responding to where Trump had come on out saying he's not going to be impeached. It's hard to impeach somebody who hasn't done anything wrong and who's created the greatest economy in the history of our country. There's a Pinocchio for you there, Donald. And he said this with an interview with Reuters. And then he went on to say that I think the people would revolt if he were impeached. Donald, I don't think you are as popular now as you were in January of 2017. That's unfortunately the reality. As far as not being impeached for not doing anything, they'll come up with something. Nancy Pelosi is already out there saying they're going to go after his taxes. They're out to get him. You know, it's a street brawl. Washington, D.C. has degenerated into a biker bar, and there's a brawl going on here. All right, getting on to the White House. Congressman Mark Meadows is no longer being considered for the White House Chief of Staff. This came from Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, and went on to say Meadows is a great friend of the president, is doing an incredible job in Congress, and the president told him we need him in Congress so he can continue the great work he is doing there. Well, I don't know about the great work because it doesn't look like he pushed all that hard at today's House Oversight Committee meeting. Now, New York's incoming Attorney General on Tuesday has promised to persecute Donald Trump, his entire family, and anyone in his orbit by hunting for crimes to charge them with. He's literally out there declaring war, that he's going to use every area of the law to get Donald Trump. We're going to get him. That's a terrible mindset for a government to be operating on right now. Looking at this morning's hearing and looking at the behavior of the Democrats versus the Republicans are too gentle. They're almost too mature. The Democrats are out there with a bare-knuckle fight. Now, here's an article that came on out from Vox.com. Let me read you the headline verbatim. It's ridiculous that it's unconstitutional for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to run for president. And this article is just this incredible puff piece on Alexandria, how she's the biggest star in the Democratic Party and has been ever since she unseated Representative Joe Crowley in the surprise primary upset in May. And so Alexandria is already looking at the White House. She's in her first term in Congress. She's inexperienced, and already she's looking at the White House. I wonder if she's going to declare for 2020. Except, of course, that she can't because she doesn't meet the age restriction. And this article is putting out a trial balloon about saying, oh, we don't need to pay attention to that. In fact, there was another article that came on out where liberals are saying, you know, anybody should be allowed to run for president. Immigrants, students, you know, anybody. These restrictions in the Constitution are really rather ridiculous. No, they're not. The reason for the requirement for a natural-born citizen is so that this country does not fall under foreign rule. the requirement for the age restriction is to guarantee that only people of a certain maturity get into that Oval Office. Okay. Now, speaking of trial balloons, this one actually got coverage on the corporate media. Representative Ted Lieu, Democrat out of California, came on out with a statement, "I would love to be able to regulate the content of speech. The First Amendment prevents me from doing so." And he went on and rambled on about, Constitution, blah, 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 blah. But I think this is a trial balloon. We've been seeing censorship all over the independent media. We know that Congress is still trying to stick that provision into the spending bill to criminalize criticism of Israel. They want freedom of speech to go away. And this may be a trial balloon. They're going to wait and see how people react to this. If they get a shrug, then they figure, we can go after the First Amendment the way we've gone after the Second Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, the Ninth Amendment, and the 10th Amendment. That's a very, very dangerous thing for somebody to be saying. If you don't have free speech, you do not have freedom. Free speech is an absolute. If there are any limits on it, then it isn't free speech, it's permitted speech. Now, here's a little bit of good news. As you know, there was a big scandal that came out earlier in the year, how Congress kept this slush fund, if you will, filled with U.S. taxpayer dollars that they would pay out to settle lawsuits involving sexual harassment by members of Congress against their staff. Well, apparently they decided they were going to end that. And there was actually a bipartisan agreement. Members of Congress will now have to pay these settlements out of their own pockets. And I think that might slow down the amount of harassment. All right, let's take a phone call. Art off the grid. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, you're talking about the occasional cortex there. First of all, let's understand the constitutional requirements no longer apply. So says the great and wonderful, all-knowing, all-wise Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Okay, well, listen, Art, I got to put you on hold. Do not hang up, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Art from Off the Grid. And Art, would you go back and repeat what you were telling us about Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
You said you had made mention about the constitutional requirements for being president. Well, I don't think those constitutional requirements can really apply anymore. I mean, after all, we've got people like the great illustrious, all wiser than the rest of us, Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself, who said it was outdated. It was outside of the times that we live in today. It really shouldn't be considered. I mean, when you have people like that who sit on the Supreme Court who think that little of the Constitution, why the hell should any of us care whether or not the next candidate for the president is, constitutionally meets the requirements or not? I mean, after all, look at Obama. There's another perfect example of never met. And on the topic of comparing the two,
hold it. Let's back up. What about Obama did not meet the constitutional requirements?
I'm still not convinced that he was born in Hawaii. Okay.
Well, living here in Hawaii, I've confirmed that he absolutely was, and his real father was Frank Marshall Davis, and that was the reason for the rigged up phony birth certificate. Now, but of course, remember they tried to run Ted Cruz in 2016, and he's not a natural born citizen. So yeah, they want to chip away at all of that. Now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg can express that opinion, but the job of the Supreme Court is limited to examining laws and comparing them against that Constitution to see if they conform, because that Constitution is the ultimate law of the land. Now, if they want to change that Constitution, there is a process called amendment, where they could go on in and say, we're going to have an amendment to lower the minimum age for the presidency from 35 down to, whatever age Alexandria is right now. But it has to go through Congress, it has to be signed by the president, and it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states.
Right. But what really got my attention, the thing that you said that really got my attention was, about, in her first term, she's an unknown. Who does this sound like? We had Barack Obama, first term, unknown, didn't do anything, never accomplished anything, but yet made it to the presidency. So he was set up to be the first. They keep saying African American, but he's a half and half. But they set him up to make history. Is it possible that maybe what we're seeing here, if she is eyeballing the White House already, could this be setting the stage?
It's arrogant in the extreme. And she's a member of the House, and Obama, if I recall correctly, was actually a senator.
Right.
Alexandria's got a long way to go to prove that she's got the chops to even consider being president. She is the darling of the Democratic Party. There's no question about that. And I'm sure that Hillary's probably gritting her teeth over the fact that Alexandria might take that coveted first woman president of the United States position. But she's going to have to wait to do it, because unless they amend that Constitution, Alexandria cannot run in 2020. Anyway, Art, we got to let you go. We got to take a station identification break, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Checking my email box, I got an email from somebody who is still keeping watch on the House Oversight Committee. And apparently now testimony is underway from these experts on compliance. And actually, it's one of the whistleblowers, and apparently they are dropping some major bombshells. So when it's all over, I'm sure there'll be a summary or a complete replay, and that's going to be worth going through, definitely. Okay, now, interesting little story. Apparently, the Department of Justice Inspector General has just found 19,000 lost Strzok and Page texts. Now, it's kind of curious where they found them, because the Department of Justice actually wiped the text messages between Strzok and Page before the Office of the Inspector General could review them. Maybe the Inspector General knocked on NSA's door and said, do you have these? Because NSA's got everything. NSA called up former FBI Director James Comey and said, we've got all of Hillary's missing emails, and Comey said, I am not interested. But if the FBI or the Department of Justice knowingly concealed, covered up, and destroyed evidence, they violated Title 18, Section 1519. Destruction, alteration, or falsification of records in federal investigations. Now, Maria Butina was this alleged Russian spy, and she's pled guilty in federal court for conspiracy to act as an illegal foreign agent in the United States. And she was accused of working to infiltrate Republican political circles through groups such as the National Rifle Association to bolster Russian interests. Now, Butina said she acted under the direction of a Russian official whom CNN has identified as Alexander Torshin, the recently retired deputy governor of the Central Bank of Russia. He's not a Russian government official. This was financial stuff. So Butina sought to establish unofficial lines of communication with Americans having power and influence over U.S. politics. Well, it sounds like a case of selective prosecution here, because every country on earth have people inside this country trying to establish unofficial lines of communication with Americans having power and influence over U.S. politics, especially Israel. But apparently talking to a Russian is now a crime in and of itself. Okay. Nancy Pelosi is out there celebrating the recapture of the House of Representatives. She's saying it's my gavel now. And apparently there was concern she did not have enough votes to win the speakership. So she's made a deal. I mean, there were some 16 House Democrats were opposed to her candidacy. And at the last second, the potential candidate to oppose Pelosi, Representative Marcia Fudge, decided to bow out, reasons not given. And some other anti-Pelosi Democrats jumped ship as well. So supposedly the deal that they made is that Pelosi will step aside after 4 years. No, she won't. They'll have to pry her out of there with a crowbar. The House passed an $867 billion farm bill, which rejected curbs on food stamps, which means President Trump now has a green light to hand out bailouts and subsidies to America's farmers. Some of them really do need it. But we know there's a lot of abuse of the food stamp system here. And apparently the measure passed with a 369 to 47 vote. It expands farm subsidies and, according to the Hill, includes language legalizing hemp production. Purpose of this legislation is to provide a safety net for farmers hit with unexpected weather or by tariffs, which is going on right now, as well as low-income Americans struggling to feed themselves and their families. It's one of the most politically sensitive pieces of legislation Congress passes. Now, Gerald Celente is out there saying what we're seeing start to unwind before us, especially with China, it's not a trade war, it's a global slowdown. And he's asking if the central banksters are going to try and boost the markets. Now, today the Dow ended 70 in the green, the other two ended slightly in the red. Not a great day, but not a bad one either here. Remember, okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Remember Janet Yellen, former head of the Federal Reserve, and made the statement that there will not be another financial crisis in her lifetime. Well, she's changed her mind. She's warning that, yes, another crisis is most definitely possible. And the tools that could help prevent another crisis are not all that great in the U.S. By which, what she probably means is the government is not using enough violence and force in the form of regulations to prevent an economic meltdown, which was caused by the Federal Reserve and its usurious policies. So, Yellen is now a scholar at the Brookings Institute and said there remains an agenda of unfinished regulation. There's always that battle going back and forth. Should we regulate the financial sector or not? And of course the financial sector says, no, we're fine. We can take care of ourselves here. Albert Edwards, 2 months ago, suggested investors are focusing on the wrong catalyst for the next crash, which he said was probably going to emerge out of China. And he says the worry is that a Chinese policy response will send the global markets into a tailspin, just as the August 2015 devaluation did. Now, today, in his latest note, he's doubling down on his assertion that a China hard landing may be the gray rhino that investors are ignoring. He uses all kinds of metaphors. Capsizing the economic ship, the death wobble, which you have to be a motorcycle rider to understand what that one means here. But back in October, he was out there saying, wondering if China's luck is running out. Actually, I think everyone's luck is running out. We know that for every nation that is enslaved to a private central bank, and that is every nation on earth except 3, by design, it produces more and more debt, more debt than available money, so the debt grows and grows and grows until it crushes the system, and that's what we're starting to see. We're concerned about an economic meltdown here in the United States of America. It'll go global because it got really close to doing that back in 2008 because of economic globalism. Now, one of the things that did stabilize the stock markets today is that there appears to be at least some progress on the China trade war truce. Apparently, China is now going to buy 500,000 tons of U.S. soybeans. This is coming out of Reuters. Now, this is kind of dicey. China does not allow GMO. So the United States agricultural sector is going to have to come up with 500,000 tons of non-GMO soybeans. And it's going to be spread out over 12 cargoes for shipment between January and March. Okay, the dollar index has been rising ever since Trump began his war on trade. Right now it's at the same 97 index level as when Trump was elected. Now, if Trump wants to win the trade war, he needs to push the dollar a lot lower. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if he does, this in turn will send the price of gold soaring. So hang on to those coins and bars. And that means that the Western central banks and the Bank of International Settlements will have to live with a rising gold price, something they really don't want to have to do. And this could actually lead to a clash between the Trump administration and the central banks. And banks sometimes decide that they don't like presidents. Remember back in, I think it was 1933, a bunch of Wall Street bankers got together and actually plotted a coup d'etat against President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And it failed because the military commander they chose to lead it, Smedley Butler, waited until he had all the necessary evidence and blew the whistle. And it was covered up. It was hushed up. It didn't become public until the mid-1970s. And it's actually the basis for the movie 7 Days in May, although the role of the bankers was notably left out of the screenplay here. Chinese auto sales are in decline for the first time in 30 years. So that's also due probably to the tariff wars with steel and aluminum here. Saudi Arabia is now feeling the pressure from pretty much the rest of the world. They bet that they could defy the United States when it pushed for oil production cuts at the OPEC meeting, gambling that Trump would not lash out in retaliation despite some heavy-handed pressure from his Twitter feed ahead of the summit in Vienna. And so far, it looks like the bet has paid off. Now, Saudi Arabia's decision to push for oil production cuts was kind of a no-brainer. They're facing serious budgetary pressure from low oil prices. And I'm sure they're much more concerned about that than any legal or political action from the U.S. Congress or the White House. Now, here's what's really interesting. The U.S. is calling for production cuts in Saudi Arabia to run up the price of oil. Right now, the United States is a net oil exporter. They've been developing a lot of oil fields, and they've just discovered one of the world's largest reserves under Texas and New Mexico. I mean, years and years worth. So the U.S. is leading the world in terms of oil production. Do they want to run up prices before they start selling that? Maybe. Now, interestingly enough, Japanese refiners will start buying Iranian crude oil in January, but they'll only buy until March to make sure they don't get on the bad side of the Trump administration in case the 180-day sanction waivers are not extended. Now, Japan is one of Iran's largest oil importers, but it's also the United States' staunchest ally in Asia. And the combination of the two is not working out well for Tokyo. Early this year, when the Japanese government tried to secure a waiver from the U.S. State Department, local refiners stopped all purchases of Iranian oil ahead of the sanctions that came into effect on November 5th. But this idea of shutting down Iran's oil exports to zero is not working out. And the United States is now having to admit they will not be able to stop Iraq from importing Iranian gas. Baghdad will continue to procure its energy requirements rather than go along with the U.S. anti-Iran sanctions. So within the context of Iraq, it's not looking good for the hawks in Washington. So, anyway, down in Venezuela, I mean, things are really bad in Venezuela. And we should be paying attention, because that's going to happen here. And apparently, Goodyear has shut down their Venezuela plant, and the only severance the employees got was a new set of tires. Over at Walmart, they're starting to test Flippy, the robot cook. And they're testing it out at its Bentonville, Arkansas headquarters to see if it might make for a valuable team member in its in-store delis. Now, remember, the last time Flippy was deployed, it had a rocky start. Over in Pasadena, it had to be taken offline after its human co-workers couldn't prepare the patties fast enough. Simply from an engineering point of view, wouldn't you have a patty maker as an adjunct to this thing? But apparently at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles, they deployed another of these Flippy robots, and it flipped 17,000 pounds of chicken tenders and tater tots. This is a little sick, I think. Okay, the Cranston School District, which is located just outside Rhode Island's capital city of Providence, has taken the school lunch debts of the students and turned them over to a collection agency. Now, the students are supposed to pay for their lunches. It's $2.50 for middle school students, $3.25 for high school students, and apparently students are showing up. They don't have the money or all the money. And so the cafeterias have been basically just keeping a tab on them. And the school district is now saying, well, it's time to get those funds to come on in here. So they're turning it over to a collection agency, which you're talking about wrecking these kids' credit reports before they even get out of high school. Over at the Boy Scouts of America, they're considering a bankruptcy filing. Apparently, all of these sex abuse lawsuits have drained the coffers. And I'd hate to see them go, but, you know, things are out of control here. I mean, when I was in the Boy Scouts, none of this stuff was going on. I think it's these prescription psychiatric medications. I think we're drugging our entire population into aberrant behavior. Getting on back to the economic news, 60% of working Americans say it's harder to retire now than 5 years ago. That's certainly true. A lot of people can't retire here. Interesting article out of Investment Watch blog. 2/3 of Americans think they are middle class. Millions of them are dead wrong. And what they're talking about is right now, half of all American workers make less than $30,533 a year. That cannot support a middle-class lifestyle for a family with children. Incomes have stagnated while the cost of living has soared, and as a result, the middle class is steadily eroding. But most Americans don't want to call themselves the elite, and they don't want to call themselves lower class or working class. So they just go on looking in the mirror and say, I'm middle class. I'm middle class. Really, I'm middle class. I have to be middle class. I've maxed out all my credit cards. Okay, once again, more and more about taxes. Apparently, there's a federally funded report that is saying that the only way that the government can raise the money to repair the interstate highway system, which is in a bad condition, is they want to turn every single mile of that interstate highway into a toll road. Gee, if we hadn't dropped $5 trillion all over the rest of the world trying to bomb them into submission, we would have the money to fix that highway. So it's, the report is fairly accurate. They have to dramatically expand highway capacity to meet growing demand. But this suggestion of just turning the entire interstate system into a single giant toll road, that's not going to make people happy. It's actually going to be an impediment to business and tourism. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And again, it's Christmas. And over here at Republic Broadcasting Network, we've been very good little boys and girls all year long. I'm sure there are many people out there who would not share that opinion. And we've got our stockings hung up by the chimney with care. So if you would like to send a little Christmas cheer our way, the postal address for a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a debit or credit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, and remember, it is Texas Central Time, extension 3 at all other times. The network thanks you. All right, getting on back to the economic news here. It should not be surprising, but homelessness is on the rise in many U.S. cities, and the reason is very, very simple. Rents are going up. And so people who were just barely getting by are being basically evicted. There's nowhere to go. There's no low rent. They wind up out on the streets. In cities with high housing costs, even a modest rent increase can significantly drive up homelessness. Now, up in Canada, Canadian citizens are going bankrupt at an alarming rate. There's been a 16% increase in bankruptcy filings just in the last month. Okay, let's talk about immigration, Europe, all that stuff that's going on over there. Getting on back to last Tuesday's on-camera kerfuffle between Trump and Schumer and Pelosi, Donald Trump basically invoked the wall in Israel when he was out there saying, we just need to follow what they did here. If we want to find out how effective a wall is, we just ask Israel. And Trump said it's 99.9% effective, and our wall will be every bit as good as that, if not better. Well, it's not like the Palestinians are trying to get into Israel other than those who are seeking employment. It's a different dynamic with all these migrant hordes. And again, Eisenhower was able to shut down the problem completely with just a fraction of the resources that border control has today. It was called Operation Wetback, and the liberals are probably out there screaming, oh, you can't say that, you can't say that. It's politically incorrect. One of the things Trump did say in his press conference that followed that spat and I applaud him for mentioning that, was the fact that there is more than just politics and globalism and Democratic voters in this issue. It's a health threat. And looking at this story from Judicial Watch, they're out there saying the corporate media is burying important facts to support the migrant agenda. They're concealing the migrant health threat. Drug-resistant tuberculosis, hepatitis, HIV, scabies, at least one case of plague. I mean, right now, over in the Democratic Republic of Congo, they're dealing with the world's second largest Ebola outbreak, and it has reached a major city that is a transportation hub. So let's say that one of these Africans who is infected gets on a plane, flies into Mexico, and crosses that open border into the United States of America. That's how serious this is going to be. And I'm sure globalists like George Soros are going to say, all right, so a few people melted into goo in front of you. I mean, come on. Just how picky you are. But apparently, I mean, they're bringing dengue fever and chikungunya. So it's a serious, serious situation. Okay, here's an interesting revelation. One of the leaders of the migrant group that is demanding entry to the United States is Alfonso Guerrero Ulloa. And as it turns out, he is a suspect in a 1987 bombing that wounded 6 American soldiers in Honduras. Now, Ulloa has lived in Mexico since 1987. Mexico considers him a freedom fighter. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about immigration. Actually, I've just now this second put up a video of the House Oversight Committee hearing into the Clinton Foundation. And it's queued up to start at the point where the whistleblowers came on in and started revealing a lot of very damaging information. Okay. Take care of that. All right. So apparently the Koch brothers organizations are now being targeted for supporting amnesty for illegal aliens. And apparently, according to Breitbart News, Koch brothers sent a letter to Congress suggesting that there should be an amnesty deal with Democrats to go along with the border wall funding. In other words, we'll fund your border wall, and in exchange, everybody who's already inside will get immediate amnesty and a path to citizenship. So Americans for Legal Immigration is launching an activism campaign today that targets the Koch brothers and their front organizations for pushing the lame duck Congress to pass amnesty for 3.5 million illegal aliens. Despite growing evidence, such pro-amnesty positions cost many GOP candidates their races in the midterm elections. It's also a Title 18 violation there, guys. All right, there is an NGO, and they're involved in migrant transport. They call themselves SOS Mediterranee. They've just announced they're going to be replacing their current vessel with a new one to resume operations in the new year. And they're saying they have not entirely given up on their commitment to pick up migrants off the Libyan coast, despite the announcement from their partner Doctors Without Borders that the Aquarius would be ending operations last week. That's the ship they're currently using. So the NGO blamed the European governments for the shutdown of operations, saying this is the result of a sustained campaign spearheaded by the Italian government and backed by other European states to delegitimize, slander, and obstruct aid organizations providing assistance to vulnerable people. that's not what they're doing. They're pushing the New World Order. Let's blur everybody together so they forget who they are. And I wonder who it is who signed the check to buy them a whole new ship. Now, as you know, yesterday, Theresa May did survive her vote of no confidence. She's not out of trouble just yet. And the Conservatives still remain split on the Brexit deal. And she's not going to be able to get that through. Brussels won't budge. She won't budge. Parliament won't budge. There's going to be a hard Brexit. Or they're going to look out their windows and see a whole bunch of yellow vests. Over in the Czech Republic, political leaders want to ban Islam completely. And they're saying, basically, it's trying to colonize their society. And they're saying that if someone calls for the killing of infidels and Jews, it's not a religion of peace. So they want to shut the door there. Over in Finland, a member of their parliament, Ville Tavio, from the right-wing nationalist Finns party, has created a major uproar by comparing the European Union with Nazi Germany during a parliamentary debate. And he basically came out and he said, federalists, meaning the EU itself, are threatening the people of Europe and the nation state. They create a new kind of Soviet Union. They create a new Nazi Germany. And of course, that sparked a major debate with politicians on both sides of the spectrum reacting very strongly. But again, look at a map. What the EU is trying to put together is basically what Nazi Germany wanted to conquer. All right, we're going to take a phone call now. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Hey, Mike, what you just pointed out about the Koch brothers, that pretty much reinforces what I try to tell people, and that pretty much these billionaire elites are one and the same mindset. Maybe a little bit of a different side of the coin, but they're pretty much they're globalists, they're for open borders. They don't care about about the people. They just care about profits. Only they don't care about the garbage they put in the environment either. They'll talk about global warming, and yet they'll push all kinds of chemicals and stuff like that. That poison air, poisons the water, and poisons people's stomachs when they eat their GMO garbage. So I think people need to wake up, stop this left-right nonsense, okay, Republican, Democrat, and understand these billionaires want to control all of us. Stop playing the Koch brothers aren't that bad, blah, blah, blah. They are bad. They're no good, just like the rest of them, just like Bloomberg, just like Soros, and you name the billionaire pretty much. That's the way they are.
Yeah, they do all seem to be on board with this agenda of turning all of planet Earth into a third world slum in order to extract more wealth from the people.
That's it. They don't care about us. They care about themselves. And the sooner people get wise and understand who these people... When we talk about the New World Order, that's basically what we're doing. We're talking about very rich elitists, very rich globalists who care only about themselves and their profits. They'll gladly get us into war, which you're seeing now. A lot of what's going on in the Middle East, that GD oil, where the Rothschilds are pretty much run that show, and you're seeing a lot of the problems with Russia, that they're creating with Russia, has to do with they're not happy enough with their own, stealing resources from everybody else. Now they want to steal even more resources from Russia and neighbors of Russia. This is all this is about, folks. Understand that these people are evil. They must be dealt with. We must get a government in there that's going to be, loyal to the American people. I'm hoping somebody like maybe Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know if she can get over her thing about firearms and respect the Second Amendment. I think she might be good, but I don't know. Cynthia McKinney, I think, was very good, and Rand Paul,
Yes.
I believe, would be very good. But other than that, I just don't. If we keep going this way, Mike, I'm afraid this country is going to go to either a civil war or we're just going to implode, one or the other, or these bums are going to get us into a nuclear war, which unfortunately is getting more and more possible too. They don't seem to respect life. They don't seem to respect this. They seem to think somehow that they're immune from it, that they'll be able to hide in their bunkers or wherever they think they're going to hide and get rid of the majority of the population. Very bad situation, Mike, and that's because we don't wake up. People don't understand. I post a lot of stuff and share a lot of stuff on Facebook and Twitter. It's the only reason I keep these things, because I want to share information that they're trying to subvert. And I'm losing a lot of friends because of it too. People don't want to know the truth.
Yeah.
I just some girl threatened. I shared stuff about Sandy Hoax. She doesn't like that. She said, "I can't talk. Don't send any to Sandy Hoax stuff." I put it on newsfeed. I can't help it. It winds up there. Wolfgang Halbig is a friend on Facebook, and I share everything I get from him with others. So that's the way it is. Because I respect that man greatly. I think he's a true patriot. He was not red pilled before, by the way. He actually started by, he wanted to share information, mistakes that they were making, and they tried to have him arrested for that.
Yeah.
That woke him up. He's completely red pilled, and he's a great patriot. And but people don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear the truth. They want to hear garbage. They don't want to sit there. They don't want to look at the other shooting in Cowards County there, where those 4 people in military gear came out the side of the building there. Those are the people who did the shooting. That's why the corrupt sheriff there, Israel, told his people to stand down.
Yes.
Because the FBI was pulling, because they probably had him just like the other sheriff there, Lombardo in Vegas. These guys are corrupt as the day is long, and they had stuff on them. So they said, "Okay, you better cooperate with us." So they said, "We tell you to stand down, you stand down." And that's what happened. And this way, these 4 were able to carry out this horrible murders. They blamed it on Cruz. They used him as a patsy. But people don't want to hear that. They don't want to know. They don't want to know anything about it, even though the pictures are right there. And I've shared that on Facebook and Twitter because Wolfgang shared about. I was looking for it for a while because I'd seen it before, and I was looking for it so I could share. I couldn't find it anymore. Wolfgang got it. He shared it, and I shared it. And that's the way. That's the only way to beat these people. We got to share information. The information, like InfoWars is right. I mean, that's actually what this is. It's an information war.
Yes.
We've got to win. We've got to get our message out. People's got to understand we are under siege. These elitists want us dead. That's what they want to do eventually. They want to, move us into their big cities, so-called smart cities.
Yes.
Total control. And if we wipe us out and think they're going to turn themselves into robots. Either or, they don't care. They say, okay, if you are wise to us and you will come after us, you know what we'll do? We'll start a war. We'll blow you all up in a nuclear war, and that's going to be it that way also.
Okay,
So
now,
this
Mark,
is a situation
let's back up here a little bit, where you were talking about the resistance that you're meeting, trying to talk to people about things that are going on. First of all, I think more and more people are waking up to what's going on, and so you're dealing with a minority population. But there are people where you're out there saying our government is behaving badly, it's doing evil things. In a way, it puts them on the spot, because now they have to decide, am I going to try and do something about that? And that's a pretty heavy choice, because we all like to think that we're good people at heart, that we would fight against injustice. You know, we want to be like the heroes we see in movies and TV. But in the real world, to actually take action against the corrupt government carries risks with it, and everybody knows it. And so people are saying, well, I really can't go along with this because I might miss a mortgage payment and then I'll be out on the streets. And so it's a gross bit of self-deception where they'll simply say, I am a good person. I would fight against injustice. I just don't see any reason to do it right now. And they'll swallow the offered propaganda, gratefully, indeed. But again, that's starting to wear out as well. The other issue, of course, is that all of us who are seeking to educate other people need to learn to do it gently. We're not going to push them across that bridge to the other side. We have to stand on the other side and beckon them forward. And don't overwhelm them with a lot of stuff. I mean, Mark, you were kind of doing exactly that. You just went on and on about all the stuff. That's going to slam on the brakes there. If you're going to talk to somebody about a topic, just, keep it simple as possible. Use the Socratic method. Ask them questions. Say, does this make sense in the official story? And, remind them about how much we know have been lied to, like Saddam's nuclear weapons. Anyway, Mark, I'm going to let you go here. We're coming up on the top of the hour.
One thing, though, Mike.
What?
I do tell him you can call Wolfgang. He actually posts his number online. I have it, and he says I could give it out, but I don't want. I'd rather them look it up and find it out. So it's not that he keeps that hidden. And I do tell people, if you don't believe me, you don't want it, you can talk to Wolfgang himself, and I tell him that he's a school safety expert, one of the best in the country, and that's pretty much that. So, it's not that I just force it down their throat. Okay?
Okay, well, there's an art to being a rabble-rouser, and it's understanding what the rabble is ready to hear and what they're not ready to hear. Anyway, Mark, we're going to let you go, and yes, Wolfgang is a cool guy. We've had him on the radio show before. All right. Getting on back to the economic news, and this is kind of interesting. There's been a new study that shows 40% of American college students never graduate. And it only underscores the fact that going to college does not guarantee a high-paying job and a better standard of living. In fact, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez basically illustrates this. She worked as a bartender before launching her upset primary campaign, despite having a degree in economics from Boston University. And she's spoken about feeling directionless after graduating with a mountain of student debt. So that is a major, major problem. Apparently, millions of degree holders are defaulting on their student loans. One study published in August said 30% of student loans are in default or in arrears. And a lot of these college students, college graduates, are struggling with underemployment or being stuck working jobs that do not require a college degree. 1 million Americans default on their student loans every single year. And if defaults continue at their current pace, roughly 40% of borrowers will have defaulted by 2023. They took a college education and they turned it into just another scam. Sure, come on in here, get a degree in women's studies or art history, and yes, we'll loan you the money because financial assistance has kind of gone away, and you'll graduate. You'll pay these loans off in just a few years, and they got you jammed on that debt hook, good and hard. Now, speaking of education, something very bizarre is going on. Harvard University's endowment, which is valued at $39 billion, it's the largest academic endowment in the world. And the private investment company has been buying up farmland and water rights located in California, mostly vineyards. And they have formed a wholly owned subsidiary called Brodea, and they're saying they're buying up the vineyards, but it looks like what they're really after are those aquifers. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And a side note for all you astronomy buffs, tonight is the peak of the Geminid meteor shower, and they're expecting it to be pretty decent. Obviously, the best time to see it is in the night sky before dawn, which means getting up very, very easy, finding the constellation Gemini, and just look for the meteors to come on down. And that will be kind of fun here. Over at the New York Times, columnist Jennifer Weiner wrote an op-ed titled "It's the Least Wonderful Time of the Year." And the gist of this op-ed is that businesses should cancel office Christmas parties so that women avoid the risk of being sexually harassed. And according to Weiner, the prospect of the holiday party is a difficult one for women due to the task of, first of all, choosing clothing that signal you are polished without being boring, attractive without being provocative, and that you're looking to be promoted, not propositioned. And this is just another continuation of this attack on Christmas. I mean, Rudolph banned, Frosty the Snowman, racist, White Christmas, racist. It's just utterly, utterly, utterly ridiculous. Apparently, over at the in Kitchener, Ontario, it was the opening night of their Christkrindle market, their version of a Christmas market. And this pastor, Jacob Raum, got up to the microphone and was reading the Christmas story from the Bible, and the microphone was cut off by city staff. And at first he thought it might be an accident, but then he said, looking at the staff, said it was clear that it was intentional. Now, here's a problem. Our retailers depend on the Christmas shopping season for 1/3 of their earnings through the entire year. If Christmas is made to go away because it offends the voodoo people, what are they going to use in its place to market to us? And yet another piece came on out here. Taylor Marshall came on out writing that men shouldn't decorate gingerbread houses because it's effeminate. And apparently this is over in Indiana in Harrison Township. It's Sweden. Sweden has shut down their controversial equality body. And it was controversial because it was run exclusively by women. It was being nicknamed the Feminism Ministry. We'll be right back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So we're talking about this situation in Sweden where they had this Swedish Gender Equality Agency, which was unveiled by the government of Sweden last January. And it quickly caught the nickname the Feminism Ministry because it was run exclusively by women. And it will now close down. Parliament adopted a new budget by center-right moderates and Christian Democrats. Now, they're going to be funded through the end of 2019, so they've got a year to kind of wind things down. But again, how do you have gender equality when only one gender is in charge of that agency? It was kind of dumb. As you know, over in New Jersey, there is a concern over this recently passed law that it is now a felony to possess a gun magazine capable of holding over 10 rounds of ammunition. Now, it's a wildly unconstitutional law. It instantly criminalizes hundreds of thousands of New Jersey citizens who legally acquired normal capacity firearms magazines, which include 17-round pistol magazines and 30-round rifle magazines, as tools of self-defense. So questions were being raised about enforcement. Now, they're expecting people to just turn in the magazines or to get them modified. so they'll only hold the required number of bullets. But apparently, the New Jersey State Police told Breitbart News they will not rule out house-to-house enforcement of the new magazine ban, meaning they plan to conduct house-to-house arrests and searches and gun magazine confiscations. This is real Nazi-style stuff. And it further underscores the entire purpose of the Second Amendment, which is to stop government tyranny. Okay, a new report on the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School massacre has called on police to investigate 7 deputies it claimed did not respond fast enough. The Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Commission found that the Broward Sheriff's Office displayed deficiencies in everything from training and command to individual performance in response to the Parkland shooting. And they're recommending the Sheriff's Office investigate the performance of 7 deputies who failed to engage the gunman despite hearing gunshots at the school. Of course, as that caller was mentioning before, that was another setup. And the shootings were actually done by these 4 guys in military attire who were photographed exiting the back of the school. Now, the Trump administration is moving to scrap an Obama-era rule which allows criminal students like accused Parkland shooter Nicholas Cruz to stay out of the criminal justice system in the name of fighting systemic racism. So it's just a huge mess. Anyway, the same Safety Commission said their recommendation is arming teachers. And they said basically the problem is that it takes too long for the police to get there, but that Nicholas Cruz supposedly stopped to reload his AR-15 5 times, all of which would have been opportunities for an armed and trained teacher to shoot him. I think it's a good idea. I think teachers should be armed, and they should be taught to shoot combat tactics. And you know what's going to happen? The crazies won't show up anymore. Have you noticed all of these mass shootings always occur in a gun-free zone? I know I can go on in and just have fun. Nobody's going to shoot back. You got to take down all those signs that say gun-free zone, put up signs that say half the houses in this neighborhood have guns. You guess which one. So let's talk a little bit about computers. 6 years ago, the Saudi Aramco's computer servers were hit with what was called the Shamoon malware. And apparently it has now come on back. And they have detected a file infected with Shamoon in its database virus total. Now, the malware was uploaded from Italy, and it's a different form from the previous 2 variants. They've made changes. Those move through networks via pre-programmed credentials. This one stays on the computer it is installed on first. There is no command and control infrastructure that would allow the attackers to communicate with the virus, and what the virus does this time is encrypt all files irreversibly rather than replacing them with politically significant images. So this is an attack weapon. This is a malware sent into somebody's servers to permanently, irreversibly encrypt all the files to make them useless. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And this may be a new trend because over at techdirt.com they have a story about how British spies are saying that they're moving away from bulk data collection, and instead they're learning how to focus on bulk equipment interference. Now, the problem with bulk data collection is there is so much of it and no real way to sort through it all to find what you're looking for. That's why NSA really never found any terrorists here. So the British spies are now focusing their efforts on mass interference with electronic devices. And at the time the investigatory powers bill was passing through Parliament, it was signed into law in 2016. Electronic interference hadn't been used, but was already seen as an alternative to bulk interception. So they want to go on out and just jam your machines here. Okay, there is a company called BriefCam, and they put out thermal imaging surveillance cameras, and their latest model allows police to identify people by gender, body size, and more interesting, skin color. Now, thermal imagers, yeah, you can pretty much figure out the gender and the body size. Skin color, that's pretty interesting. And apparently this is their video synopsis version 5. And it's hooked into apparently a system where they can identify individuals in cars in real time. So we're being surveilled here. Now, as you know, I'm using DuckDuckGo as my search engine for the most part. And the CEO of DuckDuckGo has come on out saying that Google is using location data that puts entire zip codes into politically biased filter bubbles. In other words, they're filtering what people are reading, and they're changing the filters based on where they live, so that people in different neighborhoods are getting different information. So this was coming from Gabriel Weinberg in an interview in Business Insider. So the filters are changing based on where you are here. Down in Australia, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission has recommended overseeing the commercial activities of Google and Facebook in order to protect smaller tech firms. In its preliminary report released Monday, the ACCC called for a powerful new body which would have the authority to demand information as to how the two companies adapt their algorithms and investigate how both giant tech companies might be interfering in politics here. So let's go on back here. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, down in Tennessee, U.S. Representative-elect Mark Green is a vaxxer, a vaccine truth person. And he's told constituents he believed vaccines may be causing autism, questioning the data from the Centers for Disease Control and other institutions that claim to disprove such a theory. Well, we know that the main paper from the CDC was a fraud. One of the authors blew the whistle and said the data was cherry-picked to get the result the CDC wanted. So Republican Mark Green, who's the congressman-elect from Clarksville, who also happens to be a medical doctor, expressed hesitation about the CDC's stance on vaccines. He also said he believes the Federal Health Agency has fraudulently managed the data, which, yes, we know they have. Now, his remarks came in response to an audience question at a town hall meeting in Franklin from a woman identifying herself as the parent of a young adult with autism, and the woman was concerned about possible cuts to Medicaid funding, at which point Green said, "Let me say this about autism. I have committed to people in my community up in Montgomery County to stand on the CDC's desk and get the real data on vaccines, because there is some concern that the rise in autism is the result of the preservatives that are in our vaccines." So good for this guy. Going to be a one-term representative, but good for him anyway. Story coming out of Great Britain. Apparently, there was this mother, Helen Spilsbury, who noticed that her son Jack on Sunday was coming down with a rash. And by Monday, he was covered with it and scratching all over his body. Now, they went to the doctors and originally thought he might have hand, foot, and mouth disease, but they went to the doctor and confirmed that Jack had measles. In fact, it was the worst case the doctor had ever seen. And the mother was shocked because Jack had had both of the MMR jabs when he was younger. He had that triple vaccine for measles, mumps, and rubella, and it simply did not work. So they had to call up the school and warn everybody. Apparently it was a very contagious form of measles, and they had to call up the school and say, get to everybody who was near Jack over the last few days because they're going to be sick. Okay. Now, over at the Large Hadron Collider, it's going to be offline. They're taking it offline for upgrades. It will not be activated again in 2021. And so for those of you worried about the accidental creation of a quantum black hole, you can breathe easy. No more particle smashing for a while. Now, up in Canada, the Canadian equivalent of CNN has published research letters, CBC abortions and sterilizations here. So they're out there with a chart of so-called emission savings. Having one less child is ranked in the high impact category of 58.6. So they're trying to combine the global warming scare with the depopulation agenda. Now, Al Gore, former vice president and environmental activist, is out there attacking Donald Trump's position on climate change, saying that it could boost global efforts to tackle so-called global warming due to the president's previous remarks on the issue. And he went on to say that much of what Trump says is nonsense. This from the guy who predicted the Arctic would be completely ice-free by 2014. And they flew high enough where the two pilots on board became the company's first official astronauts. And Richard Branson was on hand to watch the moment. So they're basically one step closer to space tourism. And well done. Very well done here. Meanwhile, coming in from Mars, NASA has released InSight's first selfie from the surface of the red planet, which was made up of by swinging the camera around, taking multiple shots, and merging them together. Now, it really isn't vanity. What they're doing is they're trying to survey the area underneath InSight before it puts down its instruments and starts digging into the ground. So that's just a good thing to be doing. And another story, this is out of IntelliHub, 1976. Last Tuesday was to examine the damage to this Soyuz spacecraft that was attached to the outside. And they went on out, they peeled back the thermal and meteorite shielding, they took a bunch of pictures, they took a lot of samples. NASA is saying it is too early to tell if the hull was damaged before or while in flight, and NASA is refusing to comment until the samples are being studied. And apparently the samples will be sent for chemical analysis when the spacecraft returns to Earth on December 20th. The one that's complete, not the one with the hole. It'll be interesting to see what they find. Okay. NASA's Juno mission is halfway through its science phase. And Juno, for those of you who don't remember, is this orbiter around Jupiter, and it's orbiting in a highly elongated orbit. So it goes way off track that extends for collecting all kinds of interesting data. And if you go to the article, there are some beautiful, beautiful images. Okay. The Pope's finance chief and number 3 cardinal at the Vatican, George Pell, has been found guilty of the sexual abuse of children. Apparently, the jury deliberated for 3 days and handed down the guilty verdict. And if the verdict is confirmed, it will be the highest ranking condemnation of a church official for a crime of sexual abuse. Now, last year, Cardinal Pell requested a dispensation from his duties in Rome to travel to Melbourne to defend himself against the charges, which he's always denied. Now, the Vatican has not commented on the reports, but Cardinal Pell has been taken off of the Council of Cardinals. Meanwhile, the Vatican is calling for urgent action and decisions to stop climate change. Translation, pay no attention to that cardinal who just got convicted of child sexual abuse. Global warming's going to get you. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And when he's not ranting and raving about human-caused global warming, apparently Pope Francis is poised to change the Lord's Prayer, to redo the translation. And this is continuing his tradition of turning over liturgical tables. And apparently the Italian Episcopal Conference has submitted the proposed changes to the Vatican for approval. And apparently last year the Pope brought the issue to the forefront when he described the petition, widely used for centuries in many languages, as not a good translation. Well, 2,000 years after the fact, I'm not sure how good the translation would be anyway. The Church of England, meanwhile, has decided to introduce a baptism-style ceremony for gender transitions. Now, this is the largest Christian denomination in the United Kingdom, and they're stopping short of calling it a second baptism, but basically it is the same ceremony for those announcing their new sexual identity. So clergy are being told to call men by their new female names, women by their new male names, and the guidance declares for a trans person to be addressed liturgically by the minister for the first time by their chosen name may be a powerful moment in the service. I guess it's anything to keep those collection plates filled. And you're going to love this one here. Apparently there's this pastor by the name of John Gray, and for his 8th Lamborghini Urus, said it was God who made the posh acquisition possible after he made a faith deposit on the vehicle in February. And he's calling everybody in the congregation who is wondering about just where all this money came from. He's calling them haters, but they'll be blessed. It is a bit of a racket over there. Okay, so the wife has a new car. Apparently, Gray also, apparently the wife, on the same anniversary, gifted her husband what's called the Green Box Rolex. It's a nickname to describe the Rolex Explorer 2. Comes with a price tag of $8,000. It's a good business to be in, huh? Many years ago. By the way, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Many years ago, after I left CBS Television City, I went to work briefly, had identified the TV station, had relocated the studios, and not bothered to change the station identification or even inform the FCC. So there was one FCC fine. The manager had, some months back, gone to one of these big revelation sermons where it was predicted God was going to come destroy the earth on thus and such a date, and the station manager believed it, thought it was absolutely true. And so he diverted the station's resources to 24 hours a day. Get the message out. The world is coming to an end. Repent now. And didn't show, it didn't show the paid-for programming or the paid-for commercials. And so the day that the world was supposed to end came and went. The Lord didn't show up. And the station was left with a big stack of bills they never thought they were going to have to deal with, including a major tax bill from the state of California. at which point our station manager basically kind of vanished, and we were left trying to keep the station going by ourselves. And when I first got there, they were doing some dumb things. I mean, for their news program, they were just literally clipping columns out of the newspaper and reading them on air. And that could have gotten them into trouble because they were reading them verbatim. They weren't commenting. There was no analysis. They weren't paraphrasing. It was just verbatim. So I went down to a radio station that was just down the road, and I was still a member of the Magic Castle. And I'll tell you the rest of the story when we come on back from this commercial break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm actually getting a whole bunch of emails saying, you know, which station was it? And I'm not going to say because the call letters have been acquired by another company. It's a completely different entity, and I don't want to embarrass them. But it was just a very bizarre situation. I mean, there was one day we walked into the control room at the start of the broadcast day, and we found the video director and one of the camera girls just going at it on the ground. And the reason I'd been hired there is that there was a provision in the tax code of the time where TV and radio companies, well, all companies, TV and radio companies, had to turn over their equipment every so many years to sort of make sure that the equipment providers stayed in business. And so if they couldn't sell the old equipment, they would donate it to nonprofits like Christian TV stations. And so for this little hole in the wall TV station, it was in an industrial park in Orange County, they had just amazing amounts of equipment, and my job was to basically get it all working and keep it all working here. But they were completely out of money, and it was very frustrating trying to get anything done because they had no money. Somebody had actually donated a brand new antenna for the transmitter, which was up on Mount Wilson, but they didn't have the money to actually get it installed. So we were still working on this little tiny antenna with no broadcast footprint. In fact, what was really weird was my parents' home was halfway between the studios in Orange County and Mount Wilson, and they still couldn't pick up the channel. And I mean, it got so crazy toward the end there. We were just on the air for the bare minimum amount of time to keep the license active, and then it all kind of fell apart. One of these days I'm going to write a book about that. Okay, we're getting an update about why John Huber did not show up. At least the story is being put on out that the FBI has opened an investigation, or has an open investigation, into the Clinton Foundation, and that's why he didn't show up, because he didn't want to compromise that, or at least that's the story. Personally, I think he didn't want to wind up in Fort Marcy Park. Okay, there is a new scam that's out there, and I actually got one of these myself. And it's popping up all over the country. And there's an email message that basically it's being sent to businesses. And apparently some people have bought into it. There have been evacuations. And basically what the email says is that one of your employees has been compromised and works for me, and they have planted a bomb inside your place of business. And unless you send blah, 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 blah Bitcoins to this wallet address, the bomb will go off and your business will be destroyed, and other businesses will pay more in Bitcoins because of the example. So this is happening all over the country. I even got one of these. I think this is upping the ante on the one about, hey, we hacked into your webcam and we caught you abusing yourself in front of the porno pages. So, you know, I think back to that story we reported on yesterday where the U.S., Great Britain, the entire EU do not consider the production of malware to be a criminal offense. And I'm just having a hard hard time trying to figure that one out here. Okay. Apparently, Monica Schaefer, who's a Canadian citizen who spent nearly a year in a German prison simply for posting a YouTube video entitled, "Sorry, Mom, I was wrong about the Holocaust." She's finally out of political prison and making the rounds of the independent media. Here's a very, very bizarre story, and it's basically coming out of government slaves, which is usually pretty serious about their things. They're saying that Christmas Eve is when you're at highest risk of having a heart attack. And this is coming from a new study published in the British Medical Journal, which found a person's risk of heart attack spikes during most holidays and peaks at around 10 p.m. on Christmas Eve. And if that's from the overeating or the overdrinking or just the stress of dealing with Christmas, because it is very, very stressful getting on out there trying to get the presents. And they're saying it's a big study. They covered a lot of people. The details of more than 280,000 heart attacks in Sweden over 16 years. So apparently this is localized to Sweden, but they're saying that, yeah, it's people experience emotional stress. And again, it's supposed to be a festive time. And I'll admit I'm not feeling very festive. In fact, I'm in full-bore Ebenezer Scrooge mode right about now. And yes, I've got the obligatory colored lights out in front of our living room window, but that's it. We didn't do a tree this year. I just didn't feel tree-ish. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from James in North Carolina. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I got a question about Tulsi Gabbard. You talk about her running for president. Has it ever been defined what a natural-born citizen is? My understanding is she was born in American Samoa.
No. Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard, yes. Well, it's an American territory. But apparently nobody seems to think that's an issue because, I mean, she's already gone to the first two primary states for the 2020 campaign. But I mean, they did the same thing for John McCain, because John McCain was actually born in the Panama Canal Zone. And it was simply said, yeah, that was American territory at the time, therefore he's a natural-born citizen.
So if you're born in a territory, that means you're a natural-born citizen. I mean,
that's the way it's been handled up until now.
Well, nobody brought this up when everybody was hollering about Obama, but there was a vice president named Charles Dawes under Hoover, and he was born in the territory of Kansas. And but that's apparently true. And nobody made anything of it. I just wondered about it. I mean, could it change? If there's a precedent like that, it would seem like somebody would have brought it up, but no one did. I guess if you're born in a territory anywhere or under the auspices of the United States, you are a natural-born citizen, I suppose.
Yeah, if you're under U.S. government jurisdiction, then yes, you qualify. The reason everybody kicked up a fuss about Ted Cruz is that he was born in Canada. And they were trying to basically get that past everybody when they thought Ted Cruz could defeat Donald Trump. And as far as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she was born in the Bronx, so she qualifies on that one, although not the age limit.
What was I got you. I always kind of thought Obama was a dual citizen. Has anybody ever looked into that?
I'm not aware that he was a dual citizen.
Well, a lot of people said when he lived in Indonesia, that because his father was Indonesian and he went to some kind of school or something, that there was no way that he could have done that had he not been an Indonesian citizen.
It's entirely possible, and I know there was a big stink over the fact that when Obama applied for college financial aid, he listed himself as a foreign student. But again, the issue, he was born here. I know people who knew the family, and I've confirmed it. The reason for that faked birth certificate, and by the way, this was very common back then, okay? Barack Obama's mother became pregnant with a guy named Frank Marshall Davis. He was a fellow student at UH Manoa. He'd served in World War II. He was older than she was. And he was funding his way through college as a pornographer. And Mom was one of the models. And things just got out of hand, and little Barry was born. Then later on, when she met Obama Sr. and they got married, rather than go through that whole rigmarole of an adoption, they just had the birth certificate reissued with the new name. And that being back in the 60s, and there being a lot of love childs and everything, that was actually a very common practice back then.
Okay, that's all. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. And we're getting in a interesting story here. People are starting to now report on what was presented at the House Oversight Committee hearing. And apparently these whistleblowers, these Clinton Foundation witnesses, say that John Huber and their team lost their evidence. They had to send it 3 times. So John Huber was not being a good guy. And so 2 Clinton Foundation whistleblowers spoke at the hearing, along with Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch. And Meadows told the audience today the Department of Justice was unwilling to make John Huber available for the hearing today. So that little Twitter saying that Huber couldn't testify because of the active FBI investigation, more fake news here. So Huber was assigned by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions to investigate the controversies about Hillary Clinton, and the Clinton Foundation was obviously part of the cover-up. That government is just rotten to the core. There is no redeeming quality anywhere in that federal government. It's just amazing here. Okay. Excuse me. More stuff is coming in. By the way, did you notice that when the oversight hearing began, there was a shooting scare out at Columbine, which resulted in 24 schools being shut down and evacuated. And I think they were hoping that the corporate media was going to pay attention to that, which they didn't really, because there wasn't enough blood or any blood. But of course, the corporate media has pretty much ignored the House oversight hearings as well. Meanwhile, apparently Trump's inauguration spending is now under criminal investigation by the feds. They are really after him, and I don't know why. He's giving them absolutely everything that they want. Are they that scared that he might all of a sudden turn around and say, hey, all of these crimes were committed? Anyway, the Trump inauguration spending, the probe is looking into whether the committee misspent funds and top donors gave money in exchange for access to the administration. Well, go back to that Democrat who was testifying this morning at the House Oversight Committee. Yeah, top donors, when they give money, it's for access. It's for favors. That's what politics is really all about. So it's amazing. Apparently, the Clinton crony lawyer, may have lied in court testimony. It appears that she did. And now, of course, if she did, how can anybody take her seriously while she's trying to pursue charges against others for supposedly lying under oath? Well, it's because of the classic hypocrisy. It's okay for me to do this if I can get away with it here. Okay. Gary Lineker over at the BBC, he's accused of breaching BBC guidelines and told to keep his political views to himself as cricketing icons are drawn into the Brexit Twitter spat that's erupted between ex-England footballers. So everybody's talking about it, and the BBC is trying to silence it, much the way that our social media is trying to tamp down the discussion, as it were. Let's see. Yellow vests are spreading to other countries. We already know that they're in Sweden, Netherlands, and up in Canada. So that's really going to... I really do think that is going to be something significant. It's just got so much momentum. And if you really think about it, the issues that are driving the protests, they're universal. These are not problems that are simply confined to France. They're problems we're all dealing with all over the world. And I think it's great that people are standing up and making their displeasure known. I don't want to see it go violent, but I recognize the possibility that it very likely could. All right, now, let's see. Apparently over at the Rutherford Institute, they're now demanding that the TSA amend their screening procedures regarding the pat-downs of children, that they need to respect the parents' right. And we know some of those pat-downs are very intrusive, very invasive. And they've brought Claire to tears when she's had to go through that, because she doesn't want to go through those scanners. We don't know what that's doing. All we know is that somebody made a fast buck putting them in the airports here. Okay, somebody, hang on a second. I got an email regarding that story about Christmas heart attacks. I can tell you from personal experience that we see a lot of myocardial infarctions after a good snowfall. Utah, when I lived there, reason shoveling heavy snow is very cardiac. If you have any narrowing in your coronary arteries, you will find out when you start to throw heavy snow, clearing your driveway. We made a point to move out patients from the ICU on those days. We expected significant snowfall. Well, that actually does make a lot of sense. That really does make a lot of sense. All right, we're coming up on our final commercial break for the day here. And when we come on back, I'm going to be looking for something else to share with all of you for the last segment of our program. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today here. And a quick reminder that tomorrow's Friday show and the lovely Lady Claire will be with us. So I know you're all looking forward to that. We're getting more and more information about what came out of the House Oversight Committee hearing. And apparently some of these forensic investigators testified the Clinton Foundation operated as a foreign agent early in its life and throughout its existence, and did not operate as a 501c3 charitable foundation as required by law, and it's not entitled to its status as a nonprofit. And this is very explosive testimony, because if in fact it doesn't qualify as a 501c3, then the Clintons are personally liable for millions of dollars of taxes on all that money. But again, it looks to me like it's a stonewall. I mean, that news that Huber didn't testify because the Department of Justice wouldn't let him. The news that Huber's team literally lost evidence sent to them 3 times. It's obviously part of the cover-up. This government is irretrievably, unrecoverably corrupt all the way through. And I know what's going to happen after January 20th. We're going to see the infighting is going to get even worse. The Democrats are going to go after Trump, try and find anything they can nail him on. We've got that incoming attorney up in New York that's out there. He's openly declaring he is going to take the resources of his office and sick them on Trump and Trump's family and Trump's circle of friends, trying to find anything. I don't understand why they hate this man so much, other than that he was an outsider. He came in from outside. He's not part of the machine. But he's giving them pretty much everything they want. The only apparent real point of contention is that border wall, the immigration policy. The Democrats want the borders open because they register those illegal immigrants to vote, which they're not supposed to, and they vote, and it's shifting elections. And that is one reason why California shifted so dramatically from the Republicans to the Democrats during the midterms. They just flooded those districts that were right on the border with these illegal immigrants, got them settled on in, and just said, go vote Democrat. I never thought I would live to see the day where there was this much open corruption coming out of Washington, D.C. And even when I started doing all of this going on 25 years ago, yeah, it'll be quarter of a century this year, I knew there was some corruption. I could see it. I had experienced it. I didn't realize it was so pervasive throughout the entire system. And I hope it all comes crashing down. I really do. That would be good for the United States. It would be good for the rest of the world. Okay, there's the music time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of stuff he wants to tell you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Do word of mouth or email. The corporate social media is a desert now. So please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday. Aloha, America.